主席，對唔住主席，今日我向立法會提交政府覆文，回應政府帳務委員會帳委會今年2月26日向立法會提交嘅第73號嘅報告書。我歡迎帳委會嘅報告書，亦都衷心感謝帳委會主席石禮謙議員同埋委員所付出嘅時間同埋努力。政府係接納帳委會嘅各項嘅建議，同埋喺覆文入邊我哋詳細交代咗相關政策局同埋部門嘅具體回應。帳委會亦都就73號報告書入邊關於食物環境衛生署規劃、設置和管理公廁的工作，以及香港生產力促進局提供顧問、研發和培訓服務的工作兩個章節進行咗公開嘅聆訊。我喺呢度扼要係講講係食物環境衛生署食環署同埋香港生產力促進局生產力局就建議所採取嘅主要措施同埋取得嘅進展。為我哋嘅公眾提供清潔衛生嘅公廁係一項重要嘅公共服務。食環署近年已經主動逐步改善佢嘅管理嘅公廁，包括落實增撥超過6億元嘅推行優化公廁翻新計劃，同埋加快呢啲翻新嘅工程。該處亦都會繼續善用科技，以及加強同相關部門合作，提升公廁管理同埋維修嘅速度同埋成效。具體嚟講，食環署喺2020年2月完成咗公廁嘅使用率嘅統計。喺呢個基礎上面規劃同埋管理公廁，包括檢討個別公廁嘅清潔服務嘅模式啦，提供清潔服務嘅頻次啦，訂立男女廁格嘅比例，以及翻新公廁嘅時間表等等。另外，食環署亦都喺2019年嘅11月起試行訪客嘅反饋系統，邀請使用者對公廁整體嘅潔淨同埋保養嘅滿意程度嘅評分。我哋認同公眾嘅意見對於提升公共服務質素係有正面嘅價值。食環署會因應成本效益同埋智能廁所系統嘅試驗結果等等考慮擴展改良版系統去到其他合適嘅公廁，同埋爭取喺2020年即係今年制定進一步推展公眾意見調查嘅具體計劃。創新科技署同埋生產力局設立咗審計處同埋帳委會就生產力局提供嘅顧問、研發和培訓服務工作嘅提出嘅意見同埋建議，同埋亦都係隨時隨即我哋採取咗適當
And they have immediately taken appropriate follow-up actions to implement the recommendations. To more effectively measure and monitor HKPC's performance in various aspects, including the provision of consultancy and manufacturing support services, ITC and HKPC have completed a comprehensive review on HKPC's key performance indicators, KPIs, and have formulated 19 new KPIs for implementation since 2020-21. Separately, ITC and HKPC have completed a review on the Memorandum of Administrative Arrangements on the Administration of the Subvention for the Hong Kong Productivity Council and have agreed to specify in the revised MAA that prior agreement of the Council and the Commissioner for Innovation Technology has to be obtained by HKPC for any proposed change of a certain KPI or its definite target. On the other hand, it has also taken on its inability to achieve full cost recovery for some projects. HKPC has strengthened its project management and will closely monitor the costs of consultancy projects. In addition, taking into account HKPC's public mission, ITC considers that for HKPC to better serve the community, it could deviate from the full cost recovery principle when it is engaged for government consultancy projects involving public interest, provided the specified conditions are met. In this regard, HKPC has formulated guiding principles when accepting such government projects. Meanwhile, HKPC has implemented various improvement measures on its contract management, such as strengthening its review on the risk assessment of consultancy projects, as well as strengthening the protection of HKPC's interests by setting out clearer terms in its consultancy project proposals and contractual agreements. HKPC is planning to conduct a review on its mode of operation, future business direction, and mode of subvention. The IT Bureau and ITC will participate in the review and provide views while maintaining communication with HKPC and continuing to offer views on HKPC's development strategies to ensure that its work is mission and functions and supports government policies. President, I would like to thank the Chairman and members of PAC again for their efforts and guidance. The concerned Bureau and departments will strictly adhere to its responses in their GM to implement improvement measures as soon as possible. Thank you, President.
Questions. Question 1. Honourable Ho Kai Ming has already notified me that his question will be read out by Mr. Michael Look. So, Honourable Michael Look. Thank you, Mr. President. Quite a number of people have become unemployed due to the coronavirus disease 2019 epidemic. In view of this, the government has implemented, under the existing Comprehensive Social Security Assistance Scheme, CSSA, a special scheme of assistance to the unemployed with relaxed asset limits, which is applicable for the 6-month period from 1st of June to the 30th of November this year. Recently, I have received quite a number of requests for assistance from unemployed persons applying for CSSA. They have relayed that the relevant application procedure is cumbersome and the eligibility criteria are stringent, and some officers of the Social Welfare Department made things difficult for them, displayed poor attitude, and even persuaded them to give up their applications. In this connection, will the government inform this Council first of the number of CSSA applications received from the unemployed by SWD in each of the past 12 months, and among such applications, the number of those in which the applicants did not comply with the original asset limits but would have complied with the relaxed asset limits. Second, of the procedure for SWD to vet and approve CSSA applications from the unemployed, as well as the number of such applications and when the vetting and approval of all such applications will be completed, as envisaged by it, and whether it will consider expediting the procedure so that the unemployed may obtain the assistance as early as possible. And third, of the current staffing establishment of SWD for processing CSSA applications, whether SWD will, in light of the first review the workload of the relevant officers and consider increasing the manpower just to improve the service and raise the efficiency of the vetting approval of CSSA applications from the employed. If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Labour and Welfare. Mr. President, the Comprehensive Social Security Assistance CSSA scheme provides a safety net to help persons and families who cannot support themselves financially to meet their basic needs. The scheme is non-contributory, but applicants have to pass a means test to ensure public resources are used on those who are genuinely in need. Having considered the unprecedented challenges posed by the coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19 in Hong Kong, the Chief Executive announced on the 8th of April 2020 the second round of anti-epidemic measures, including the provision of a time-limited unemployment support scheme through the CSSA system, with a view to providing timely and basic assistance to the unemployed during this difficult time. The Finance Committee of the LegCo approved the related funding on the 18th of April 2020. The Social Welfare Department, SWD, will temporarily relax the CSSA asset limits for the able-bodied persons, including able-bodied adult singletons and able-bodied adults and children under family cases by 100% for 6 months. The relevant scheme will be effective from 1st of June to 30th of November 2020. The asset limits will revert to the normal level on the 1st of December 2020. Separately, under the existing CSSA arrangement, the value of an owner-occupied residential property of households with able-bodied persons will be disregarded for a grace period of the first 12 months. The arrangement will also apply to applicants under the 6-month unemployment support scheme. The 2019 policy address has also announced a series of measures to improve the CSSA. Such measures include increasing the maximum rent allowance significantly, raising the maximum level of disregarded earnings substantially from $25 to $1,400 per month, strengthening the the employment services and extending a range of supplement and special grants to eligible non-elderly able-bodied recipients, etc. The proposal has already been submitted to the FC for approval, following which the government will implement the measures as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the government adjusts CSSA payment rates according to the price index movements every year to maintain the purchasing power of the payments. During the period between 2011 and 2019, the CSSA payments registered a cumulative increase of about 40%. The government has submitted a proposal to the FC this year to increase the CSSA payments by 3.6% from 1st February 2020. Upon FC's approval, the relevant increase will take retrospective effect from the 1st of February. Since the outbreak of COVID-19 in the community, the government has implemented a series of disease control measures in view of the development of the pandemic. Such measures include special work arrangements for civil servants and various arrangements to minimize social contact, etc. In this connection, the Social Security Field Units of the SWD has put in place restrictive measures on public services involving face-to-face contact since early February to reduce the risk of community infection. Nevertheless, the SWD has been implementing special measures like facilitating applicants to make use of the application drop boxes outside the field units, or to provide application information by post and email, etc., to ensure timely processing of the applications and timely disbursement of the relevant payments to eligible applicants and existing recipients. The field units have also continued to arrange meetings with individual applicants as necessary in order to actively process their applications without delay. In view of the government's announcement on the gradual resumption of the public services made on 28th of April, all SSFUs of the SWD have resumed opening to the public starting from 4th of May. SWD will keep in close view the development of the pandemic and adjust the arrangements as appropriate. I must also stress that SWD is committed to serve those in need and provide various social welfare services for them. The government believes that most of the unemployed CSSA recipients are only in need of temporary assistance to tide over the difficulties. During this difficult time, the society should lend a helping hand to those in financial needs by providing them basic assistance. My reply is set out below. First, the number of CSSA applicants under the unemployment category received by SWD in the past year is set out in the annex. The 6-month unemployment support scheme will be effective from 1st of June to 30th of November 2020. Second, generally, if CSSA applicants or their guardians or appointees provide all the necessary information, the application procedures can be completed in 4 weeks. During the period when the SSFUs shortened their opening hours in response to the pandemic, the SWD has continued to process the applications in a timely manner with the aforementioned special measures. Third, at present, the SWD has more than 1,300 Social Security grade officers working in various field units in the territory. They are responsible for processing and approving applications and cases of CSSA and Social Security allowance, like OH allowance, OH living allowance, and disability allowance. To cope with the recent and anticipated increase in workload related to the CSSA scheme, the department has adopted a two-pronged approach to step up the manpower of the field units starting from May 2020. SWD has assigned additional staff to share the workload through temporary internal redeployment and engage over 70 experienced retired Social Security grade officers under the Post-Retirement Service Contract Scheme to assist in processing and vetting CSSA applications. Thank you. Mr. McCulloch, President. Well, I think he's being functional. I think he's disconnected as usual. For CSSA applications, we have seen a 7-time increase, almost 4,000 by the month of April. You're just having dozens more former employees and expect that to allow them to cope with the workload. This is quite a far cry from our expectation. The unemployment rate has gone up to 5.2%. For the FDU's assistance scheme, for just half a day's time, all the quota of 5,000 was taken up. We tried to get an unemployment assistance scheme. The government would never listen to us. Now the government is saying that there should be a relaxation of the CSSA system. Can you not have further relaxation? It is an unusual time. Can you not allow applications on an individual basis? Even though we have a household living under the same roof, they don't share the financial means, and there may be conflicts between the two generations. Now, there may be family members with a job, but others not, and then it will be difficult if you ask for the application to be made on a household basis. Can you not allow individual household members to lodge a separate application for CSSA? Secretary, I think we know that for the latest unemployment figures, for the first 3 months of this year, the rate was 5.2%. Well, for the unemployment, judging from the global outlook, may continue for a period of time. So we can't say that because it is just for a short time, let's do it. Because it can easily be there for a few years, and then it may become a long-term issue. Therefore, when we consider a change of the system, we must bear this in mind, and we may not, and we should not resort to such an approach. For the application, if we don't have applications on a household basis, then it means that the mutual assistance and mutual care among family members will be thrown out of the window. That's not our family policy. I think the society must take the matter seriously and consider such a change in our policy. Mr. Kwok Wai Kang. Thank you, President. I'd like to go to the annex to the answer. On average, for the previous year, on average, we got 500 applications. Now, in March this year, 1,800 or so, and in April, 3,900 cases. You can see that the problem is getting worse. But then the Secretary is saying that he's going to step up the manpower level, and he's still of the view that the applications can be vetted and approved in 4 weeks' time. So what about the workload of the frontline staff members of the SWD? Are they having a very heavy workload? Are they able to cope? And then if you talk about a 4-week time frame, is that the performance pledge that you have approved? But does it mean that it involves overtime work or an increase in the workload? And I want to know whether there are ways to ease their work burden. Secretary. Well, when we talk about an increase in the workload, it doesn't just depend on the number of applications. We're supposed to get something done by the 1st of February, but we are still waiting for the FC approval. In other words, we have a heavy workload because of the need to back pay the recipients. In other words, what we are trying to do to cope with the situation is to streamline the procedures. Usually, we have to review the CSSA cases once every 6 months. Currently, what we do is that we simply extend the eligibility automatically by 6 months so as to cut down on the need to review the cases. And we're talking about over 200,000 cases that has gone a long way to reduce the workload. We've also engaged retirees. It's all because they are more familiar with all the work procedures. That's better than engaging new recruits because we have to spend time to train the new recruits. So we are trying to help them to meet the challenge by lowering the level of the workload. Dr. N. Zhang. Thank you, President. According to the information, in the months March and April, for the number of applications under the unemployment category, we have seen a spike, over 5,000 cases in total. Now, according to the Secretary, there has been a relaxation of the eligibility criteria, but then that would only come into effect in June. So what about those applying in March and April? Will their applications be vetted on the basis of the relaxed asset limits that will come into place in June or according to the existing criteria? I know that many people are in financial hardship. Are you going to exercise discretion so that you apply the same rule to those applications received before June? Yes, it will come into effect on the 1st of June. So the criteria would only apply to applications received on and after the 1st of June. But of course, people may submit an application before the end of May, and we may not be able to complete the vetting and approval procedures within the month of May. It may take place in June, and then the new criteria will apply. Mr. Leung Chee Chang. Mr. President, well, we have a serious unemployment problem. The rate is 5.2%. The SWD, under the leadership of the Secretary, has increased their manpower. But I just wonder whether they can meet the future needs. I think it is going to be difficult. I have heard some experts. It's not a comment from the Secretary. It is said that the jobless population will increase. Let's hope that it won't exceed the figure in the year 2003. There will be a jump in the number of unemployed. According to your figures, in April, 3,900 people put in an application. It is expected that the number will go up. Now, you have engaged over 70 experienced retired Social Security grade officers to help. Is that enough? Now, Secretary, you have said that you have been most merciful. You have relaxed the asset limit. You have also increased the amount of disregarded income. But what about the core of the community? We have been asking for a dedicated assistance scheme for the unemployed. You are adamant. Now, you would like to help the unemployed. Now, many people have told me the following. They lost their job in March. They just don't know when they can get a job. They just want to have something to tie them over. As soon as they become employed again, they don't need CSSA. But then the the application will undergo a vetting procedure for 4 months. So it's difficult to get the assistance. Secretary, we aim at completing the vetting procedure in 4 months' time. But in the interim, if there is an urgent financial need, the SWD will provide the assistance needed or refer to the relevant departments. Say, for example, if a family is short of food, then we can refer the family to food banks run by NGOs subvented by us. Mr. Vincent Zhang. Mr. President, what about the FTU's idea to have an unemployment assistance scheme? That would be the best idea. For the CSSA system, I'm afraid many people have been left out. Now, according to the figures, in April, we were getting 4,000 applications, 8 times the previous level. So many more have lost their jobs and need your help. Now, in the early part of June, you will start to receive applications. There will be more and more of them. Now, you're saying that under the Love Upgrading Skill Scheme, there will be 10,000 more openings. What are you going to do? Are you going to consider our proposals? Secretary, well, we have been helping the unemployed to find jobs as part and parcel of our system. We will look at the developments. We'll try to see how we can help. Recently, for the SWD, it has talked to the service centers as well as the employee retraining board. There's been more communication. Let's hope that we can help them to get a job as early as possible. Ms. Alice Mack. Mr. President, I have wanted to ask a particular question about the increase in the number of applications under the unemployment category. The increase has been so significant, and as a result of the pandemic, the time taken to process the applications has been much longer. Our ward officers have received many calls for assistance. While they were waiting for the applications to be approved, they found it difficult to make ends meet. We tried to get some temporary assistance for them, and usually they've been told that the quota has been used up and they can't even get help from the food banks. So, Secretary, what about temporary relief for the unemployed? I'm interested in that. But then when the Secretary answered Mr. Michael Look's question, he said that for this unemployment support scheme, we need to take a long-term view, and you would like to make sure that family members will help each other out. Secretary, for the unemployment rate as well as the underemployment rate, the figures are going up. That's the government's findings. And for the FTU's findings, again, the figures are very optimistic. Many people, like 70%, tell us that they are not optimistic in getting a job. And then there are 30% who haven't got any income at all. Secretary, I think we agree that things are not going to improve for the better in the short term. Of course, I understand that if we have to put together an unemployment assistance scheme, you need to take a considered view, say, for example, whether the application should be lodged on the basis of a household, and you should be taken together with other labor rights and interests. Secretary, for unemployment assistance, do you agree with me that it is a blank, and I think there is a need to have a long-term sort of arrangement? Secretary, please speak on behalf of the administration on the following. The labor market is very bleak and unemployment rates are going up. I think you need to fill the gap. I think you need to come up with a long-term solution for unemployment assistance. Secretary, we are supporting the unemployed workers. I don't think you can say that it is a blank. We have been helping those who have been dismissed or made redundant. We have the long service payment. We have also got the severance pay. And there's 2/3 of every year that you have worked. If you compare that with the unemployment safeguards in the UK, I think we are more or less the same. And in fact, for SP and SP, that is the severance pay and the long service payment, I think we are more generous. So you can't say that we haven't got anything in place at all. However, if you want to revamp the system, you need to consider the roles played respectively by the government, employers, and the employees. Thank you.
Question number 2, Mr. Martin Liao. Mr. President, when making public in March this year the overall law and order situation of Hong Kong in 2019, the police indicated that during the Anti-Extradition Amendment Bill incidents, online publicity materials had already turned into weapon-making handbooks or even guides to kill the police. And the violent acts concerned also involved the use of petrol bombs, corrosive liquids, genuine firearms and bullets, and explosives. In order to express their dissatisfaction with society and the government, rioters chose to hurt the public and cause social panic. Which exactly is the behavior of homegrown terrorism? The police have repeatedly pointed out that the community must vigilantly guard against the emergence of homegrown terrorism. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it has assessed the risk of attacks by homegrown terrorists in Hong Kong at present, if so, of the assessment outcome, and 2, whether it has adjusted its counterterrorism strategies in response to the changes in the aforesaid risk of attacks if so, of the details, and 3, of the measures in place to raise public vigilance against homegrown terrorism, such as educating youngsters with immature minds to say no clearly to violence, so as to prevent homegrown terrorism from taking root in Hong Kong. Secretary for Security. Madam Deputy, my consolidated reply to the 3 parts of Mr. Liao's question is as follows. Because of the incident of anti-legislative amendment, a series of processions and public assemblies have been staged in Hong Kong and ended up in violence since June last year. There were even some 10 cases involving explosives and firearms, which were extremely alarming in both destructive power and quantities. These cases are similar to overseas terrorist activities in terms of their modus operandi, showing signs of the breeding of local terrorism in Hong Kong. First, the various types of explosives seized by the police include TATP, triacetone triperoxide, ANFO, ammonium nitrate fuel oil, HMTD, hexamethylene triperoxide diamine, and DNT, the dinitrotoluene, and black powder, which are very powerful explosives commonly used in overseas terrorist attacks. Examples are the bombing at a federal building in Oklahoma of the United States in 1995, the serial bombing of the underground and buses in London of the United Kingdom in 2005, the bombing at government buildings in Oslo of Norway in 2011, the serial bombing at an airport and a metro station in Brussels of Belgium in 2016, the serial bombing at churches and hotels in Sri Lanka in 2019, etc. These terrorist attacks took place in different corners of the world and led to severe casualties. Second, the detonation methods intended to be used by the persons involved in these cases resemble those commonly used in attacks by different terrorists around the world. For example, the police seized a bomb made of a pressure cooker and nails. The same kind of pressure cooker bomb was used by terrorists in the bombing of a marathon in Boston of the United States in 2013, which resulted in 3 deaths and 264 injuries. Besides, the police seized detonating devices made of mobile phones, and similar remote devices made of mobile phones were used in a serial bombing in New York and New Jersey of the United States in 2016, resulting in 34 injuries. The police also seized a pipe bomb, which could be hurled like hand grenades, and similar bomb was used in a bombing in New York subway station in 2017, which resulted in 3 severe injuries. Third, the police seized extremely toxic and highly flammable chemicals of alarming types and quantities, which include potassium nitrate, ammonium nitrate, sulfuric acid, sulfur, acetone, strong acids, ethanol, cyanide, zinc cyanide, etc. If these raw materials are used for launching attacks, they will cause severe injuries and deaths. Besides explosives, the police seized 5 genuine guns and a large quantity of bullets in their operations, including a semi-automatic rifle. The same kind of rifle was used in a mass shooting on a crowd of concert-goers in Las Vegas of the United States, which resulted in over 50 deaths and 500 injuries. The police is conducting full investigation into relevant cases, identifying sources of the items concerned, and whether organized crimes were involved in the acts of these offenses, and closely monitoring the risks regarding the threat of local terrorism. Currently, the terrorist threat level of Hong Kong is moderate. The Hong Kong SAR government is keeping a close watch over the situation and enhancing the gathering of intelligence, and does not rule out the escalation of the terrorist threat level. The Hong Kong SAR government will combat terrorism with the most stringent laws. If sufficient evidence is found upon an investigation, the police and the Department of Justice will consider prosecution under the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Measures Ordinance, UNATMO,
and will consider freezing the relevant assets to cut off their funding resources and thereby preventing them from recruiting members. Regardless of whether the UNATMO is used, cases of explosives and firearms per se are very serious offences, and they infringe the Crimes Ordinance, the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance, the Organised and Serious Crimes Ordinance, etc., with a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. To prevent and combat terrorist activities, the Hong Kong SAR government set up the Interdepartmental Counterterrorism Unit, ICTU, in 2018, comprising members from 6 disciplinary forces, namely the Police and Immigration Department, Customs and Excise Department, Correctional Services Department, Fire Services Department, and the Government Flying Service. The government's counterterrorism strategy, or CT strategy, covers 4 areas, namely prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. The setup of the ICTU provides an interdepartmental CT platform on top of the existing CT framework so that relevant departments can collaborate to take forward a series of initiatives, which include establishing a CT intelligence exchange mechanism and work platform for various departments to enhance integration and analysis of intelligence, conducting interdepartmental CT exercises and training to ensure preparedness at all times, as well as strengthening cooperation and synergy among departments. In light of the numerous cases of explosives and firearms, the Hong Kong SAR government has enhanced the internal CT preparedness. Departments and agencies concerned have devised relevant action plans to ensure immediate and effective responses in the event of terrorist attacks. Terrorist attacks pose harm to everyone in society, and CT is an issue concerning all members of society. Bombs are indiscriminate and will, once exploded, harm people around by killing, causing physical disabilities, and destroy buildings. No one in the vicinity can escape from the explosion should it occur. Members of the public should stay vigilant to guard against the breeding of local terrorism by, inter alia, heightening alertness, reporting to the police under safe conditions, and cooperating with the police in their law enforcement duties. The Hong Kong SAR government will enhance CT awareness among members of the public through public education. Law enforcement agencies will also conduct drills on the strategy on run, hide, and report to educate the public. That is, running away from the scene as soon as possible or hiding at sheltered places and reporting to the police under safe conditions. Regarding youngsters, the government will continue to instill among them correct values through various youth programs so that they can say no to violence. The government will also emphasize the law-abiding awareness to help students understand that they need to take responsibility for their own action, and that the consequence of having a criminal record for life will have a profound impact on their future, so that they realize the importance of law compliance. Mr. Martin Liao. Madam Deputy, in the Secretary's reply, he mentioned the Hong Kong SAR government will combat terrorism with the most stringent laws. Around the world, terrorism is really an alarming problem in societies. And every society will take the most stringent stance to combat terrorism. Since the Hong Kong SAR government is now aware of the breeding or emerging of the homegrown terrorism, and that we should nip it in the bud, we understand that it's actually evolving from the anti-extradition bill saga and black-clad violence last year. The Hong Kong SAR government seems to lack experience, and there is a concern whether the Hong Kong SAR is fully prepared to combat terrorism. Secretary earlier expressed that to better cut off the funding sources and freezing the assets of these terrorists, thereby preventing them from recruiting members, the government will consider invoking the UNATMO ordinance. What is the progress on the matter? Secretary, about combating terrorism, we will not relax our effort. We all understand the harm posed to society by terrorism. Of course, we need to cut off the funding sources. In terms of investigation and gathering of intelligence, we hope that this can be improved so that we have the power given under the ordinance. Under the UNATMO, In fact, apart from this piece of legislation, the Organised and Serious Crimes Ordinance also allows the law enforcement agencies to confiscate the proceeds from crime and also freeze the related assets. Likewise, under the anti-terrorism laws or drug trafficking ordinance, we also have the power to freeze the assets of the offenders. So, depending on the nature of the crime, law enforcement agencies can apply with the court to freeze the assets and even confiscate their property. Where evidence is sufficient, we will be proactive in invoking these powers to make sure that homegrown terrorism will not find its footing in Hong Kong. The target of investigation at the moment is that when investigating offenders, we also check if they have foreign ties, because in the anti-terrorism laws, it is provided that if some individuals are already defined as members of a terrorist organization or terrorists by the United Nations, and if the offender is an affiliated person of this terrorist, then the UN ATMO applies. So we'll leave no stone unturned and investigate in depth when we investigate these cases and pursue liability through every means. Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Madam Deputy, the Secretary just now replied to Mr. Martin Liao's question, and he said that at the moment, explosives, firearms and ammunition of great destructive power have been seized. At the same time, he also referred to acts harming members of the public in Hong Kong, and these acts may be linked to foreign terrorist organizations. Now, Secretary, if firearms and weapons of such destructive powers have been seized, and at the same time we still have supporters not condemning such acts, then will you look into these matters, especially whether these people are collaborating with foreign forces and especially foreign terrorist organizations? Because we need to find out where these weapons and explosives come from, because they've been imported in large quantities and distributed to the innocent youngsters, or that these explosives and firearms are used in a syndicated fashion to harm the public in Hong Kong. I'm very concerned, Secretary, because I'm very concerned about the lives and property of Hong Kong people, since some people are not condemning these acts at all. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Anyone encouraging violence, causing the society to be engulfed in terror or violence, we should condemn these individuals. It's because of their encouragement that there is a wedge driven in our society. And if these acts involve terrorism, then there is all the more reason that we take them to task, be it the moral responsibility or otherwise, although we may not be able to hold them legally liable. At the moment, we have people in Hong Kong being incited by others. Of course, we need to check their possible foreign ties with organizations overseas. Every time we looked for the sources of explosives and firearms. There is abundant information on the internet on how a bomb can be made. Mr. Liao's question referred to online publicity materials. involving the making of bombs and making of weapons, causing the greatest destruction, is really evil. Of course, we need to hold the culprits accountable. However, we must acknowledge that such information on how a bomb should be created can be found easily on the internet. And raw materials can be easily purchased at stores selling chemicals. So we need to collaborate with different departments. Say, some raw materials may be available in the market in smaller quantities for normal use, but if these raw materials are or fall into the hands of terrorists, then they can easily manufacture bombs. On the use of these chemicals, we do have a control system. Hong Kong is a free port. In terms of control of goods, especially the import of goods or substance, whether by individual passengers or by mass transport, the Customs and Excise plays a gatekeeping role in checking these goods, and we have advanced technologies such as X-ray equipment, and also devices to check the ingredients of these goods to see if they contain raw materials that can be used to manufacture explosives and firearms. We also note that some offenders may import components and parts of rivals into Hong Kong. And likewise, the law enforcement agency will carefully check these suspicious items. And under different circumstances, because of the intelligence gathering work and analysis work of the C&E department, they have been able to crack down on the smuggling of firearms and other dangerous goods. As I explained to members just now, if these circumstances arise, the Interdepartmental Counterterrorism Unit will analyze the relevant evidence. I remind members to be succinct because we have 17 members waiting. Mr. Jeffrey Lam, you have a follow-up question. I was asking about bullets, guns. Where do they come from? The Secretary hasn't answered me. Secretary, as I said just now, when these goods are imported into Hong Kong, we conduct checks to plug every gap possible. In fact, in a recent case, the police have cracked down on a local workshop making bullets. And according to the police, they imported some machines with molds to create bullets. And every department will spare no effort in combating terrorism. Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, Madam Deputy. We now understand that local terrorism can take place in different forms, in the form of a jungle guerrilla or guerrilla in the urban districts. It's now everywhere. So after the central authorities adopt the national security law for implementation in Hong Kong, things will be different. In the past, we have seen cases of members of the public taking the law in their own hands to punish others. And today we have also seen some sporadic cases of roads being blocked, etc. So the masterminds have changed their tact. Nowadays, offenders are as young as 15 or 16-year-olds, and they are the lost sheep away from the herd because they are no longer under the control of the mastermind. So my question is for the government is how they can catch the masterminds behind everything. Do they have sufficient resources and talents? Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy. when the police investigates into serious violence and terrorist activities, this is, of course, one of the directions that they look into, because, indeed, we have seen many youngsters taking part in a series of violent acts. Just today, we have arrested over 10 people, most of them being teenagers below the age of 20. They have been arrested for possession of offensive weapon or possession of tools and equipment fit for unlawful purposes, and also other public security-related offenses. To a certain extent, young people are influenced to engage in law-breaking behavior, and they themselves are victims. But they also have to understand that they need to be responsible for their own actions. So be it the SAR government or various sectors of the community, the education sector, social workers, so on and so forth, we all need to educate our young people and instill among them the sense of law-abidingness, or that their criminal record will give lifelong impact on them. Mrs. Stephen Ho, your question has been answered. I asked about strategy, manpower, resources, whether they are sufficient. But the problem is terrorism is indiscriminate. We have bombs and petrol bombs in the street, and once they're exploded, it's not the same as Mr. Lam Cheuk Ting's suggestion about July 21st. Secretary. Madam Deputy, I believe I refer to the 4 strategies. I believe this would suffice. As for talents, we always need more talents in the face of law-breaking behavior and offenders. There are more and more of them, and there are more and more cases in different districts. The police is strained, but I'm grateful to the police for sparing no effort in combating crime. And right now, they're able to put the situation under control. For resources, we'll continue to strive for more. In terms of manpower, I hope that at appropriate times, when we strive for more manpower resources, we can have the support of the Legislative Council. We have 16 members who would like to follow up on the questions, but time is up. Please follow up on the question on other occasions.
Question number 3, Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Madam Deputy. It has been reported that some people wearing press cards or reflective press vests committed improper or illegal acts, for example, insulting police officers with coarse and sexual harassment languages during live broadcasts, obstructing police officers in law enforcement, and even attempting to rescue persons who were being arrested at the scenes of public events. Moreover, a junior secondary school student aged only 12 covered news in the capacity of a student journalist for an online media at the scene of an unforeseen incident. In this connection, will the government inform this council 1. Whether it will enact legislation to regulate online media by expressly specifying the qualifications and minimum ages required for and the professional conduct to be observed by their editors and reporters, and set up a monitoring body to monitor the operation of online media. 2. Given that press cards are currently issued by various media organizations or associations on their own, making it difficult for law enforcement officers to ascertain the identity of the cardholder as a journalist, whether the government will comprehensively review the existing system for issuing press cards, including whether there is a need to designate an authorized organization to issue such cards, the criteria for issuance, and a mechanism to prevent abuse, and consider afresh setting up an official organization to centralize the issuance of press cards, and 3. Whether it will draw up a code of practice and guidelines on news covering to specify at the scenes of crime and large-scale public events, journalists are not allowed to cross the cordon line set up by the police, and they should cover news in the press area set up by the police, etc. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. Madam Deputy, after consulting the Security Bureau, the Home Affairs Bureau, and the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau, our consolidated reply to Ms. Elizabeth Quat's question is as follows. 1 and 2. Freedom of the press, as expressly guaranteed under Article 27 of the Basic Law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China, is a core value of Hong Kong. Under existing legislation, the operation of different media in Hong Kong is subject to some forms of regulation. For example, television and sound broadcasters are subject to licensing under the Broadcasting Ordinance, Cap 562, and Telecommunications Ordinance, Cap 106, respectively. Printed media, be they newspapers or magazines, are required to be registered under the Registration of Local Newspapers Ordinance, Cap 268. Besides, they are also subject to the general law, such as in respect of publication of obscene and indecent articles, copyright protection, defamation, etc. The SAR government is committed to maintaining a facilitative environment in which the media industry can develop under appropriate regulation, allowing reporters to cover and report news, and fully enabling it to exert its function as the fourth estate. To facilitate media reporting work, the government currently does not have any plan to conduct central registration of journalists and does not intend to regulate and vet media practitioners' qualifications for reporting. However, as major providers of news and information for the community, media organizations should act responsibly and observe the law in the dissemination of news, irrespective of whether it is through the electronic mode or printed platform. On part 3 of the question, the Hong Kong SAR government respects the work of reporting by media practitioners and believes that professional and bona fide journalists would not participate in illegal acts or intentionally obstruct police enforcement while covering events. The police have a duty to safeguard public safety and public order. This duty is a statutory one which the police must discharge. During operations and where circumstances permit, the police will endeavor to facilitate the work of the media on the basis of mutual understanding and respect so that both sides can perform their respective functions. Indeed, every possible effort has been made for reporters' convenience, provided that police operations will not be affected. The police have also kept reminding reporters that they should pay attention to police instructions and maintain appropriate distance from the police officers to ensure the safety of both sides. To enhance communication and explore how to foster the mutual understanding and respect between policing and reporting work, the Commissioner of Police met with representatives of 4 media associations on the 21st of May. They are the Hong Kong Journalists Association, the Hong Kong Press Photographers Association, Hong Kong News Executives Association, and Hong Kong Federation of Journalists. Concerns of both sides were discussed, including the recent observations about difficulty for law enforcement officers to ascertain the identity of journalists in respect of persons carrying press cards. Among the 52 recommendations made by the Independent Police Complaints Council, or IPCC, in its thematic study released on the 15th of May, 2 of them cover relevant matters, i.e., 1, to review how to facilitate the work of reporters in major operations without causing undue hindrance to the police's enforcement actions, and 2, to review the need for engaging media representatives to draw up a code of practice, allowing the police and media to fulfill their respective duties and for ensuring the safety of all concerned. The Security Bureau has already set up a task force to follow up with the IPCC's recommendation. The Secretary for Security will personally supervise the task force. Thank you. Elizabeth Quarter, Madam Deputy, with regard to this ostrich approach adopted by the administration and also the very mild response, I think many members of the public will not accept it, and they would also find it difficult to accept. So how come you were just turning a blind eye to this? because we're regulating both the printed and also the electronic media, how come the online media are not subject to such regulations? So how are you going to respond to that? And also for journalists, I think it's also a very serious problem, because we can see that at scenes of riots, there are more journalists than police officers, and there are actually more reporters than rioters. In fact, they're standing in the way of police enforcement actions, and in European and European countries and the US, they've also set up this licensing system. In the US they have, and in the UK they also have the system. And in the UK, well, there is an authority for issuing of license, and some 19 media organizations have set up a monitoring body. And then for the definition of reporters, it's very clear, well, full-time or part-time reporters, and also all or part of or half of their income would come from reporting. And they would also have to furnish documentation to prove that, and from time to time they would also have to submit their media or stories that they have published. So they would be subject to regulation and so on. So how come we are not able to learn from them, so that we can also borrow from their system, so that we can also better regulate the press in Hong Kong, so that they would maintain a high standard of service, and we would also be able to protect both the public and the reporter safety. Secretary, thank you. Let me reiterate here. Press freedom has long been something, or a core value that we cherish a lot in Hong Kong. So to enable the press to work with the minimum level of regulation, so that they can report and cover stories freely while they work, that has also been the long-standing policy of the administration, and we hope to enable them to fully discharge their function as the fourth estate in monitoring what is happening in our society and also what is being done by the administration. That's our intention. Of course, we understand that a balance needs to be struck. If there is over-regulation, then there is a possibility that news coverage and freedom might be restricted to a certain extent, and that is something that we don't want to see. And therefore, in balancing the interests of all parties, the administration still hopes that press freedom would not be subject to any interference, so that they'll be able to discharge their supervising or monitoring role, and then the public will also be able to enjoy their freedom to know. As regards standardizing the issuance of press cards, we have already given an answer in the main reply. I don't propose to supplement it. Which part of your question has not been answered? So in the UK, in the US, they've also got press cards uniformly. So has the freedom of press been affected? So why can't we do the same? So which secretary is to answer? Thank you, Madam Deputy. Well, I think different places have different practices. In Hong Kong, we have already balanced press freedom with proper regulation. We'd like to provide a facilitative environment in which the media industry can work, so that they can cover news in a relatively free environment. That's why when it comes to regulation, we try to be as relaxed as possible. But then there is no question of no regulation at all, because where the media are present, they would also have to abide by the relevant legislation in the course of covering news. Mr. Wong Teng Kwong. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Well, for those reporters working in the press, I think it's a profession that should be respected. It's a highly professional job. But then there have been changes in the media. And present-day media are very different from the conventional ones, in particular the online medias. Well, when it comes to fake news or inciting people to do something, well, they have been found to have been involved in doing things that would enrage most, if not all, in a society. So as Ms. Elizabeth Court just proposed, would we be regulating the online media through certain regulation or legislation? For example, the editors and also the reporters would have to possess certain qualifications so that they would have to reach a certain minimum age, because earlier on there was a 13-year-old boy who claimed himself to be a reporter. So they will have to abide by certain professional codes. So will the administration set up such a regulatory body so that for these illicit media agencies, actions can be taken against them? Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy. As I said in the main reply, at present, it's not true to say that there is no regulation at all. As we just said, in terms of the licensing and registration system, we do have regulation in place. And then for media agencies, they would also have to observe general laws. For example, as I said, if they're involved in obscene articles or defamation and so on, they would also have to be subject to legal punishment or penalties. And if there are any illicit or illegal acts, I'm sure there are laws in place to punish them. So for the rest, I'll defer to my colleague, the Secretary for Security. Yes, Madam Deputy, as the main reply has already expressly said, for the media and police officers, they have their own duties. And the government's stance is that there should be mutual respect so that both will be able to do their jobs. And on that premise, we hope to enable both sides to do their job satisfactorily. Well, in the question, it has been pointed out that indeed there have been cases in which alleged reporters were found present at the scenes of events, and some falsified press cards might have been found. For example, they might have been bought online, and when they were pressed, they said that they had not been issued by the relevant press agencies, and then they also got YouTube videos, and it's easy to guess reflective press vests, and also they'll be able to feel for themselves how things would be like at scenes of riots. So they are not bona fide reporters, and there are people who make use of the fact that when reporters are present, then they would just go into the crowds, and then they would cause harm. They would do harms to police officers and people wearing the yellow vests. When they are present at the scene, well, when victims have been hurt, and they would try to prevent those people from being attacked or assaulted. And we could also see people wearing the yellow vests, the offenders who had just been arrested. So for professional reporters, yes, they have to be there to cover the news, but then police officers would also have to be there to enforce the law. And how do we strike a balance? And that is not just about one side doing something. I believe that both sides would also have to think hard about this as to how they are going to deal with the situation, so that for those who genuinely engage in covering news, the reporters will be able to do so in a safe manner. And then they should also not be obstructing police officers enforcing the law. So they'll be able to discharge the duties, and then the police officers also do not need to engage in any conflicts with professional reporters covering the news. As I said in the main reply, the Commissioner for Police has already met the relevant media associations, and in the IPCC report, it has also said that there are issues that we have to deal with very seriously. That's the reason why, as we said in the main reply, for the two recommendations made by the IPCC report, I'll be following up on this with the task force that we have specifically set up. We hope that we can adopt this mutually accommodating attitude so that we'll be able to find a way out which is conducive to both sides without obstructing the work of both sides. Ann Chiang, Madam Deputy, just now the Secretary made it very clear. He was aware of the fact that there are indeed people who are not mainstream reporters and some even fake journalists. And the Commissioner met with 4 media associations, the Journalists Association, the Press Photographers Association, the Hong Kong News Executives Association, and Hong Kong Federation of Journalists. They are the conventional media organizations. Yes, you said that you can also discuss things with them and even sign a code of practice with them. It's fine. But then what about those who work for online platforms and also the so-called small reporters? They are very young student reporters. So sometimes we find more reporters than police officers or even protesters. So sometimes when the police try to enforce the law, they find that the rioters would be hiding behind the reporters, and then when they try to go after the rioters or protesters, they would spray the pepper spray on the face of the reporters, and on occasions they would also apologize because some police officers might have acted rather rudely. But then that's because of the reporters. In the UK, they have standardized this. All right, they have this journalist authority who would be issuing the press cards in a standardized manner. But then for the 4 press associations you refer to, are they responsible for all that? No, that's not true, because there are mainstream news agencies which are also very enraged because when they try to take shots of a scene, there are so many reporters in front of them, and they also find it difficult to blame them. And they've also aired grievances with me, and they find it difficult to do their jobs too. And Chiang, can you come to your question? So will you consider setting up a standardized regulatory body so that it can issue press cards to the reporters who would like to respond? Please be brief, because we also have 10 members in the queue, and 7 members would also like to follow up. So Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. Yes, as I said, we'd like to provide a facilitative environment in which the media industry can work and cover news so that they can fully discharge their function as the fourth estate. We have no plan to register and issue press cards in a uniform manner. But then, as we just said, there is another way to regulate the situation. It's not true to say that there is only one way to issue press cards. In fact, there is an alternative to this, so that the media associations can also agree among themselves, and then they can also come up with a set of rules so that we can tell who's a reporter, and that will facilitate the work of the reporters and also facilitate police officers in doing their jobs. And I understand that the police force and the 4 media associations have talked, and that's the first step. At the same time, I'm sure there will be further discussions with other stakeholders, hoping that we can reach a consensus so that we can facilitate the work of both sides. And at the same time, we can also ensure safety for all parties concerned. Yes, Secretary for Security. Well, thank you, Madam Deputy. I believe that if we can work with the profession, if we can have mutual respect and practice that is agreeable to both sides, yes, as we have set out very clearly in the main reply, that is at the scene. Well, what's the definition of reporters? We have professional reporters, and then for professional reporters, they've been trained, and because they are professional, and therefore they would also have to take up the moral responsibility as professional reporters. That's why in arranging for these professional reporters to cover the news, we have been able to ensure that they can work properly. But then when there are 50, 60 people or 500, 600 people who claim themselves to be reporters, then what are we supposed to do? So that's a very practical issue that we have to deal with on the spot. So we have to find a way out so that for professional reporters, they would be protected because they are professionals. So that's something that we have to bear in mind. 7 members would like to follow up, but then because of the time constraint, we will have to move on. Yes, Paul Chair, any point of order? Yes, These are very important questions, and yet only 3 members have managed to ask questions. So in terms of the arrangement, I'm not happy with that because we have not been able to ask all the questions that we'd like to ask. And for these important issues, there are many secretaries who are here to answer the questions. But then if they are saying things that are very similar, and as a result, members have not been able to put questions to them. So in making arrangements and inviting secretaries to answer the questions, I hope that you would have to grasp the time better. Okay, I understand. I've been acting strictly in accordance with the rules of procedure. I've been looking at the number of times that you've been able to ask questions and also the order of you're pressing the button to ask questions. I've been observing that. I understand that these are issues of public concern, and therefore in answering the questions, please be as brief as possible. And members also understand that you can also raise the questions on other occasions. Move on. Let's move on.
Question for Mr. Chen Hengpeng. Madam Deputy, a report in 2010 pointed out that the land costs of petrol station sites in Hong Kong were double of those in Tokyo and nearly 6 times of those in London. Last year, a petrol station was granted at a land premium for its site of $620 million, which, when amortized over 21 years, amounted to as high as $80,000 per day or $316 per square foot per month. There are comments that high land costs is the main reason for the persistently high retail prices of auto fuels. And with Hong Kong's economy hard-hit by the epidemic in recent months, reduction in pump prices can reduce the operating costs for commercial vehicles and the commuting cost of the public. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, of the criteria adopted by the authorities for determining the locations and the lease terms of petrol stations, whether they have considered making available more petrol station sites and shortening the lease terms so as to maintain flexibility in land use and enhance competition in the fuel market? If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. 2. Given that since April 2018, the government has published tender amounts of unsuccessful tender submissions on an anonymous basis after the completion of the transaction procedures in relation to the successful bid under the land sale program, whether such arrangement is applicable to petrol station sites put up for sale by tender, if not, reasons for that. And 3, given that in recent years, the government granted sites at nil land premium for setting up 12 dedicated auto-liquefied petroleum gas LPG filling stations, with a cap placed on LPG retail prices at such filling stations, which is set according to a prescribed pricing formula, whether the authorities will consider adopting such approach in granting petrol station sites with a view to reducing pump prices, if so, of the details and timetable, if not, reasons for that. Secretary for the Environment. Madam Deputy, the Environment Bureau's consolidated reply to the 3 parts of the question is as follows. In considering whether it is necessary to reserve land for petrol station in area development, the government will make reference to the relevant parts in the Hong Kong Planning Standards and Guidelines HKPC, as well as the development plan and traffic volume of that area. In selecting locations as petrol station sites, factors such as land use compatibility, traffic, environmental, and fire safety, etc., have to be taken into account. As for the lease term of these sites, according to the decision of the EXCO on the 15th of July 1997 on land leases and related matters, currently the lease term of land approved for sale by the government for petrol station use is 21 years. The Competition Commission published a study report on Hong Kong's auto fuel market in May 2017, setting out recommendations to enhance competition in Hong Kong's auto fuel market, including putting up more petrol station sites. Given that existing petrol stations can meet the current market demand for auto fuel, and also in view of the land shortage here, the government's policy to encourage the use of public transport and to reduce reliance on private cars, we do not see a strong case for providing more land for petrol station use at this stage. Notwithstanding the above, in light of the Commission's view that there are at present difficulties in converting private land to petrol station use, we have introduced facilitative measures to help the private sector convert private land to petrol station use with a view to enhancing competition. In this connection, if our Bureau received a proposal to convert private land to petrol station use, we will provide a one-stop service, which includes coordinating communications between the applicant and relevant government departments, as well as the provision of technical advice by government departments in planning permission or amendment of plan application if applicable, and related land procedures. We believe that such an arrangement can save applicants time in liaising with individual departments and help them respond to the views of the departments more effectively. In addition, where appropriate, our Bureau plans to split larger petrol station sites into smaller ones so as to increase the number of petrol stations and promote competition. We are studying with relevant departments the feasibility from the perspective of traffic, fire safety, gas safety, and the number of petrol stations in the vicinity, etc. In terms of tendering arrangements, petrol station sites are largely the same as government land in general. LPG filling stations adopt a different approach because it's necessary to achieve the policy objective of converting diesel taxis and public light buses to auto LPG ones as soon as possible to improve roadside air quality. Therefore, a pricing formula and zero land premium are adopted to quickly set up LPG filling network with a reasonable coverage to keep the price of auto LPG at a competitive level. This special background and consideration does not apply to petrol stations. Hong Kong is small and densely populated. In densely developed urban areas, roads are narrow and traffic is heavy. The government's policy is to encourage the use of public transport and to reduce reliance on private cars. Although the government does not use land premium for petrol stations to control the growth of vehicles, if the price of auto fuel products is substantially reduced owing to lower than market value or even zero land premium for petrol stations at the expense of government revenue, this is in effect using taxpayers' money to subsidize private vehicle owners, and may also indirectly encourage ownership of vehicles and the making of more unnecessary trips. This may worsen traffic congestion and undermine the effectiveness of measures to improve roadside air quality. Hence, any proposal to change the existing tendering arrangements must be carefully considered from various policy perspectives such as environment, traffic, tax, land use, etc. As for publishing the tender amount of unsuccessful bidders on an anonymous basis after completion of the transaction procedures for land sale sites, it's currently applicable only to public tenders for residential, commercial, and industrial sites. Madam Deputy, the retail prices of auto fuels in Hong Kong are determined by the market in a free market economy. The role of the government is to make sure that there is a stable fuel supply, enhance the transparency of prices of auto fuel prices, and remove barriers to market entry to promote competition. I appreciate that the public is concerned about the matter and thank Mr. Chen for his suggestions. The Bureau will study with relevant policy bureaus and departments to see if there is a need to further adjust existing policies. Thank you. Mr. Ben Chan, I listened to the administration's reply. I understand that high land prices and high retail prices of auto fuels is the work of the government. We see that oil prices have dropped to zero or even to a negative. How come in Hong Kong the prices are still high? The government said if we offer less than market value for these sites at the expense of government revenue, it means that we're using taxpayers' money to subsidize private vehicle owners. Well, but the majority of Hong Kong people are already using public transport. Do you want to wait till 100% of usage in public transport before you give a chance for people to actually own private cars? I'd like to ask government officials, you get to use private cars fueled with auto fuels paid by Hong Kong people. For the first 100 or 200 or 300 private cars, the money they made from them are paid towards land premium because it is $80,000 per day before they can make a profit. We see that cost of living is increasing. How come that we cannot offer concessionary policies for these sites so that prices can be dropped? Do you think that $50 per litre is reasonable? Or is it the case that $16 per litre is high enough? It's only $13 in Singapore. We stand at $16 or $17. Why do you want our pump prices to be so high? So what is the reasonable level of auto fuel? Secretary, I thank Mr. Chen for his views. As I've said in my reply, we don't use land premium for petrol stations to control the growth of vehicles. As I said, if we take the initiative and take an active action to deliberately suppress auto fuel prices, it may bring unintended consequences. Having said that, in the last paragraph, I said that I appreciate that the public is concerned about the auto fuel market. We will keep an open mind to listen to your views. We will work with different bureaus and departments and follow up. Mr. Wilson Orr, please hold. Mr. Ben Chen, what hasn't been answered? My question was, what in his view is the reasonable price level for auto fuel for our reference? As I said in my reply, we look at auto fuel prices from different angles, whether there is a sufficient supply, whether there is transparency in the market. Mr. Wilson Orr. Well, we have oil prices quick to rise and slow to drop, and there is serious imbalance. It is well known in the world. I feel from the Secretary's reply that he's actually living in cloud cuckoo land. As we all know that international crude oil prices have been dropping. New York prices in May has dropped to a negative level. My observation is that despite the drop in oil prices, car owners and commercial vehicle drivers cannot benefit, no matter how much the prices have dropped. For oil companies and their approach to quick to rise, slow to drop in auto fuel prices and suspected collusion, well, will the government actually do anything? I see that the Secretary nodded, but what does that mean? If oil prices is heavily related to people's livelihood, Secretary, can you give us more commitment? Can you be a better supervisor? If you don't do anything now, the public will lose more confidence for the government. When oil companies refuse to disclose more cost data, are you in a position to review tax policies and land policies so that there won't be any more possible collusion between oil companies to fix prices, as well as these rockets and feathers relating to oil prices? I understand that members are very concerned about this. We keep an open mind to listen to views, and we will work with different policies and bureaus to follow up on the matter. That is as stated in my reply. Well, in recent days, the Consumer Council has conducted an analysis. It was done in May. They state clearly that in recent years there hasn't been any signs that oil prices are quick to rise and slow to drop. That's the observation of the Consumer Council, but they have made suggestions. Say, for example, asking for more transparency, because they think that there are too many different concessions offered by different oil companies. Drivers find it difficult to find out what is what. We will follow up on these suggestions. What hasn't been answered? The Secretary has completely evaded my question. I asked whether this administration will make more of a commitment to follow up on this matter. I thank the member for his view. When we're working together to fight the epidemic, the government is willing to be more committed to help everyone. The anti-epidemic fund is there to help different sectors, including the transport sector. That is a short-term measure. If members have any views, we'll be happy to listen to them. Regulation of oil prices, as you understand, is a complicated matter. It takes time for us to deal with it. We will follow up and work on it. In the short term, we will use the anti-epidemic fund to help different sectors. Mr. Frankie Yik. I'd like to say this first. This morning, I spoke to some old schoolmates of mine in Australia. Today is 0.829 Australian dollars per litre. It's about $4.30 in Hong Kong dollars. Just now, Mr. Ben Chen told you that in Singapore, it's $13. I think the government should seriously consider whether auto fuel prices is a necessity or a luxury. I think to a lot of people is a necessity. Just now, you cited the statement of the Consumer Council, but Ms. Anna Wu, the chairperson, said there is a market malfunctioning. And in paragraph 4 of your reply, you said that if these sites are offered with a lower than market value or zero price, then it is offered at the expense of government revenue. We have never asked the government not to charge any land premium. We would like the government to find a surveyor to set prices of these sites so that the same level will be applied to different tenderers. The one who offered the lowest auto fuel price will get the bid. This is to ensure competition. I understand that this is a change in mentality, and it relies on not just the Environment Bureau to make it happen. I hope that the senior echelon of the government will lead different government departments to deal with this, because our oil prices have always been the highest in the world, and that has never changed. I thank Mr. Yik for his comment. As I said, we understand that some people, drivers or owners, are highly concerned about this matter. In the short term, we have the anti-epidemic fund to help affected trades. The Environment Bureau will work with different policy bureaus and departments on these suggestions. Mr. Yik's suggestion is rather new. We have conducted some studies. For the government to intervene into an auto fuel market is something that is seen in only a handful of places. We'll carefully listen to members' views and see if there are other places that are similar to the situation in Hong Kong so that we can make a comparison. We'll keep an open mind to listen to views. But you can't underestimate the complexity of the matter, because it involves the environment and traffic and different people. We need to strike a balance. will work with different departments to follow up on these views. Thank you. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you. We always have the impression that oil prices are quick to rise and slow to drop. A high petrol prices will put tremendous pressure on operating cost. The Secretary mentioned about a study report of the Competition Commission. One of the recommendations is to put up more sites for petrol stations. But for various reasons, the government said that they will not make available new sites for this use. The Environment Bureau said that if they receive proposals for converting private land, they will offer a one-stop service. Just now, the Secretary said that for larger petrol station sites, it can be split into smaller ones. But I don't know how it works out. How many applications will there be for conversion of a private land to petrol station use? From the information I have, in the past decade, there has been about a dozen applications. Over half of them have been successful to meet the conditions. Mr. Porter. Well, seeing that is the Environment Bureau Secretary that answered the question, we know what line is going to take. This question should be answered by the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau. There are different considerations: environment, public transport, and the public. I think the Secretary is a bit delusional. They said that they intend not to use land premium as a means of control, but they said in the same breath that they will offer help when there are applications to convert private land. So do you want to be environmentally friendly, or do you want to make use of this to generate more government revenue? Secretary, we have to look at objective data to have a discussion amongst different Asian major cities. If we compare the ratio of vehicles and petrol, if we compare Hong Kong, Singapore, Taipei, and Tokyo, for Hong Kong, we have the highest ratio. Hong Kong is densely populated and is small. Compared to Tokyo or Taipei, we have a high number of petrol stations. For each, it serves 3,000 vehicles, similar to Singapore. In Tokyo, one serves about 4,000. In Taipei, one station serves about 6,000 to 7,000. So it gives you a better picture of whether our government policies are reasonable or not. Two members indicated they would like to follow up. Please do so on another occasion.
Question 5, Dr. Priscilla. President, with regards to various livelihood initiatives, will the government inform this council? 1. As the government announced in January that it will lower the minimum eligible age of the $2 transport fare concession scheme from 65 to 60, whether the government will expeditiously and before the end of the current session of LegCo submit the funding proposal to the Finance Committee so that persons aged 60 to 64 could enjoy the $2 transport fare concession as early as possible. 2. As the government indicated last October that before completing the study on a scheme of providing cash allowance on a regular basis for low-income households not living in public rental housing and not receiving comprehensive Social Security assistance, or CSSA, it would invite the Community Care Fund to provide 2 rounds of one-off living subsidy for those households in 2020 to 21. Of the latest progress of such work and the anticipated dates on which the subsidy would be disbursed. And 3, given that the government has offered a time-limited unemployment support scheme under the CSSA scheme to render assistance to those who have recently become unemployed due to the epidemic, whether the government will waive for the unemployed persons the requirement that CSSA applications have to be made on a household basis so that they may apply for CSSA on their own, and whether it will disburse an additional allowance to unemployed persons who are currently receiving CSSA. Secretary for Labour and Welfare. President, having consulted the relevant policy bureaus, my reply to the member's question is set out below. 1. The Chief Executive announced in January the proposal of lowering the eligible age of the government public transport fare concession scheme for the elderly and eligible persons with disabilities from the existing 65 to 60. The Labour and Welfare Bureau and Transport Department have requested the consultancy firm to come up with the practical options for full implementation of the proposal in their ongoing comprehensive review. The consultancy firm will complete their review and submit the consultancy report in around mid-2020. Upon receipt of the completed consultancy report, the government will study carefully the recommendations and announce the implementation details of the proposal. According to information provided by the Home Affairs Bureau, the Commission on Poverty approved funding via the Community Care Fund for the disbursement of 2 rounds of one-off living subsidy to low-income households who are not living in public housing and not receiving CSSA in 2020 to 21. The total estimated expenditure of the program is $2.56591 billion. It is expected that about 105,500 households, or around 272,000 persons, and about 137.15 thousand households, or around 353.6 thousand persons, will benefit from the first round and second round of disbursement, respectively. Applications are handled in phases according to the household size. Applications for the first round of subsidy will start on the 2nd of July until the 30th of November. Applications for the second round will commence in January next year. The subsidy amount of each of the household size groups for the 2 rounds of disbursement is the same, that is $4,500 for one-person households, $9,000 for two-person households, $12,500 for three-person households, $14,500 for four-person households, and $15,500 for 5 or more person households. For applications with all the information duly submitted, it is estimated that the subsidy may be disbursed within 2 months from the date of application. Third part of the question. The CSSA scheme provides a safety net to help persons and families who cannot support themselves financially in order to meet their basic needs. The scheme is non-contributory, but applicants have to pass a means test to ensure public resources are used on those who are genuinely in need. The means test of the scheme is conducted on a household basis, which is in keeping with the concept of promoting mutual support among family members. Under special circumstances, such as an individual having no economic ties with other persons in the same household as verified by the Social Welfare Department, the department will consider allowing him or her to apply for CSSA independently on a discretionary basis. Having considered the unprecedented challenges posed by COVID-19 in Hong Kong, the Chief Executive announced on the 8th of April the second round of anti-epidemic measures, including the provision of a time-limited unemployment support scheme through CSSA, with a view to providing timely and basic assistance to unemployed persons during this difficult time. The Finance Committee of LegCo approved the related funding on the 18th of April. SWD will temporarily relax the CSSA asset limits for able-bodied persons, including able-bodied adult singletons and able-bodied adults and children under family cases, by 100% for 6 months. The relevant scheme will be effective from the 1st of June to the 30th of November. That is, the asset limits will revert to the normal level from the 1st of December. Meanwhile, under the existing CSSA arrangement, the value of an owner-occupied residential property of able-bodied households will be disregarded for a grace period of the first 12 months. The arrangement will also apply to applicants under the 6-month unemployment support scheme. There are currently no mechanisms or systems in place to disburse unemployment assistance funds promptly in Hong Kong. These systems include 1. A pay-as-you-go income tax system, 2. A contributory social insurance system, or 3. A central provident fund system. It will take time if we were to establish such a mechanism or system, and imminent needs cannot be relieved quickly. As an expedient measure, the government will launch the 6-month unemployment support scheme mentioned above through the CSSA. In addition, employees are qualified for severance payment or long service payment if they satisfy the conditions stipulated in the employment ordinance. Meanwhile, under the Love Upgrading Special Scheme of the Employees Retraining Board, the maximum amount of monthly allowance per eligible employee who are unemployed or underemployed during the training period has been increased to $5,800 with effect from the 25th of May. Dr. Priscilla Leung, apparently the Secretary has a very high IQ, but he must be pragmatic. A lot of unemployed persons are reluctant to receive CSSA, especially those aged 60 to 64. They have been asking for the $2 concessionary fares a long time ago, but you have constantly referred to studies. You promised this a long time ago, so you should get it done. For the $10,000 cash payout, speed is very important. You are very able, Secretary. Would you consider allowing those aged 60 to 64 to use the non-personalized octopus cards or the so-called green octopus cards so that they can enjoy the $2 fare? And then you can start exploring the specialized octopus cards or the elderly or silver age card. You must be pragmatic, and speed is also very important. Secretary, for the so-called $2 concessionary fare scheme, the review has taken place for more than a year, and there was extensive consultation and discussion with stakeholders. Lowering the age threshold from 65 to 60 would not solve all the problems because there are a lot of consequences. For example, for the public light buses, if we lower the eligible age from 65 to 60, I'm sure a lot of operators would go out of business because the PLB operations would be greatly affected. So we must assess the overall picture. If we are to implement any temporary measure, we must consider whether there's a possibility of making it permanent. If that is the case, we would never be able to tackle the problem of abuse. Which part of the question wasn't answered? He promised already, so he should not constantly talk about studies. My question was, how can you disperse the money efficiently? If you drag your feet, you cannot help the public. We have not dragged our feet. We are engaging a study already. The Secretary is known of having a great IQ. For the age bracket 60 to 64, the elderly people have always been ignored. Many people would retire at 60. Myself and Mr. Leung Chi-Chang proposed a silver age card at the Welfare Services panel. My question is, for those between 60 and 64, apart from the $2 concessionary fare, is there anything you can do for this age bracket? What are your plans, Secretary? President, as we review the transport fare concession scheme, we considered the issue of age. For those between 60 and 64, as we know, there is something known as the elderly card. For those between 60 to 64, if they hold personalized octopus cards or other IDs, the issue is whether we can extend the benefits to this age bracket. Mr. Frankie Yek. President, I'd like to follow up on part one of Dr. Priscilla Leung's question. The $2 concession scheme is indeed a great policy because it would encourage the elderly to travel. But for those between 60 to 64, I don't think they can be classified as the elderly yet. We hope the elderly concession can be extended to other forms of transport, including public light buses, kaito, and shuttle service. The Transport Department indicated that the fares of certain transport services are not regulated, and as such, they are not included in the scheme. But I have told the government that the sectors are willing to accept the minimum fare level as the basis of subsidy, so you don't have to worry about fare fluctuations. Many transport operators are suffering. If they are excluded, then they would face even sterner competition, and they could be driven out of business. So I hope you would consider including the forms of transport I mentioned. As we review the concession scheme in the future, we would come to a conclusion on whether or not to include certain forms of public transport. We are coming to the end of the study. The Transport Department will discuss with stakeholders what the acceptable arrangements would be. That way, different public transport operators can participate, and our elderly and PWDs can benefit. The work is ongoing. Mr. Peter Shiu. Mr. Shiu Ka-chun. Thank you, President. The government said the adjustment of the CSSA payment levels have been tabled at the Finance Committee, but it comes after the item on Ocean Park. So apparently the priority is on rescuing Ocean Park instead of helping the elderly. NGO food banks are continuing to help the people, and some people are criticizing the SWD for ignoring the needs of the people. And certain for those who are paying lower rent, they are asked to relocate. Would high rents prohibit people from applying for CSSA? If so, would you disclose the cap on rental level? There is no such requirement. But as in terms of consideration of different cases, you can imagine that we would look into cases for the sake of public money. For households who can pay a rent of $30,000, even though they are only receiving $16,000 in CSSA, the SWD are obliged to look into the cases before approving the applications. Mr. Ben Chen. Thank you, President. We have a secretary with a very high IQ, but apparently he doesn't understand the plight of the people. For the Silver Age card that we propose, it was accepted by the government. The secretary said he's concerned that PLB operators would go out of business. Whether or not the operators decide to install the octopus system is a choice of their own. But this should not be a reason of preventing those between 60 to 64 from enjoying the $2 fare. If our elderly people are prevented from having a comfortable life, then that would be regrettable. Secretary, you said if the elderly people are allowed to use the $2 fare, then PLB operators would go out of business. Can you explain the justifications in detail? That way we can gauge whether such concerns are valid. Please do not understand what I said. The review on the concession scheme has started some time ago, and many areas would be considered, including age. Early this year, the chief executive came up with a decision, and a policy was established. But the review would also cover areas such as the forms of public transport. The public light buses were only one example. I wanted to illustrate that there could be far-reaching consequences. That's why we need a holistic review. The public light buses are not the main consideration. Instead, we must ensure that the overall policy is sustainable. Mr. Chair, which part of the question wasn't answered? If the policy is implemented, why would public light bus operators be driven out of business? He didn't answer the question. Please sit down. First of all, this is not the main reason of consideration because many factors would be taken into account. If we include the age bracket 60 to 64, while PLBs are not included in the scheme, their patronage might drop by 30 to 40%, and their business would take a great hit. Mr. Chair. The Secretary said the review or the scheme has been in place for quite some time. This is not about the principles or details of the scheme. It's simply about relaxing the age threshold. First of all, declaration of interest, I might be considered an elderly person already. We lack tourists these days. A lot of businesses are suffering, and a lot of people are poor. Well, the Secretary, you said there could be far-reaching consequences. Can we actually allow the silver hair to stimulate our economy? In terms of the extradition bill or Article 23, well, these have dragged on for a long time. And for this exercise, you engage a consultancy. How much did you spend? Who did you engage? And how did they come up with the conclusion that there could be far-reaching consequences? Thank you very much. When the scheme was implemented, we promised LegCo that there would be a comprehensive review. And as such, in terms of the scope of application, prevention of abuse, and how other forms of public transport can draw up appropriate fare levels, these are all part of the review. On the 14th of January, the chief executive announced her decision on one of the elements of it was only one part of the review. We did promise LegCo that there would be a comprehensive review on the scheme, and the review would be completed soon.
Last question seeking an oral reply. The Honourable Dennis Kwok.
Central People's Government in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, the Liaison Office, published an article in the newspaper stating that we will, as always, continue to support the government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region in establishing and perfecting the legal system and enforcement mechanism of the Special Administrative Region to safeguard national security, end quote. In addition, some political figures in Hong Kong have recently initiated an online petition to urge the government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to expeditiously enact legislation on Article 23 of the Basic Law. In this connection, Will the government inform this council, number one, whether there have been, since January this year, officials from the liaison office and other offices set up by the Central People's Government in SAR or local political organization and figures expressing to any official of the SAR government the view that there is a pressing need at present for SAR to enact legislation on Article 23? If so, who have put forward such a view and of the relevant details? Whether it has assessed the impacts to be brought about by the SAR government's embarking at the present moment on the legislative exercise for Article 23 on Hong Kong's political and economic situations and social atmosphere, as well as on the relationship between Hong Kong and the international community. If it has assessed of the outcome, if not the reasons for that. And number three, whether the chief executive will undertake that the current term government will not commence the legislative exercise on Article 23 within the remainder of its term, if not of the reasons for that.
Secretary for Security. President, regarding the issue of enacting legislation on Article 23 of the Basic Law, in view of the deliberation of the draft decision on establishing and improving the legal system and enforcement mechanisms for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to safeguard national security, or the decision recently announced at the third session of the 13th National People's Congress, my consolidated reply is as follows. Hong Kong SAR is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China. Safeguarding national sovereignty, security, and development interests is the constitutional requirement of Hong Kong SAR, the duty of the Hong Kong SAR government, and also in the interest of all Hong Kong residents. The SAR has the constitutional obligation to enact legislation on BL 23. It has been almost 23 years since the reunification. Due to various reasons, it is disappointing that legislation on BL 23 has yet to be enacted. Different parties may put forward their views on this matter to the SL government, of which the details of which will not be disclosed. Different countries. Mr. Chen Chi-Chin, point of order. What is your point of order? A call for quorum, please.
局長。
Secretary. President, different countries have enacted legislation to safeguard national security, covering the legal system and enforcement mechanisms in respect of national security. A search in the Internet will easily yield results of laws of different countries which are related to national security. For example, the United States have at least 20 relevant items of such laws, which include the National Security Act, uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism Act, Logan Act, Homeland Security Act, Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Foreign Agents Registration Act, Foreign Missions Act, Alien Registration Act, and Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, etc. As regards other jurisdictions, examples include the Treason Felony Act, Official Secrets Act, Political Parties, Elections and Referendums Act, the Security Service Act of the United Kingdom, the National Security Act, Criminal Act Code, Access to Information Act, Secure Air Travel Act, Canada Elections Act, and Canadian Security Intelligence Service Act of Canada, as well as the National Security Act Amendment, Espionage and Foreign Interference Act, Criminal Code Act, Crime Act, and Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme Act of Australia. This shows that all countries have the right and duty to safeguard their national security and sovereignty. Safeguarding national sovereignty and security is of utmost importance to building a stable and safe society. With a stable and safe society, members of the public can then live safely and peacefully. The economy can develop steadily, and prosperity can be sustained. The SL government maintains that establishing and improving the legal system and enforcement mechanisms for safeguarding national security is conducive to Hong Kong's economic development and people's livelihood, to maintaining Hong Kong's long-term prosperity and stability, and to Hong Kong's fundamental interests. On the 22nd of this month, at the third session of the 13th MPC, the deliberation by MPC of the decision was announced. Legislation on national security is undoubtedly within the purview of the central authorities. As in other countries in the world, it is the authority of the country to legislate on its own national security. MPC is the highest organ of state power, and its decisions are legally binding with the highest authority. The SL government supports the MPC's deliberation of the decision. With regard to the decision, I must highlight the following key points. First, the SL government is firmly committed to safeguarding national security, and legislation is of great urgency. In view of the increasingly notable national security risks faced by SAR, to legislate on BL23 has been stigmatized and demonized, and it is difficult for the executive and legislature of the SAR to enact on its own law to safeguard national security in the foreseeable future. The violence associated with the disturbances arising from the legislative exercise of the Fugitive Offenders Bill since June last year has been escalating. There have been various incidents involving explosives and firearms, the risks of terrorist activities, and seriously threatening personal and public safety. During this period, organizations advocating Hong Kong independence and self-determination incited protesters, encouraged young people to desecrate and burn the national flag openly, vandalized the national emblem, and stormed the Central People's Government's office in Hong Kong, and made plans to mobilize so-called international support to interfere with Hong Kong's affairs. These acts smeared the implementation of one country, two systems in Hong Kong, and openly challenged the authority of the central government and the SAR government. Further, some of the political parties' members proclaimed many times that they would paralyze the SL government. and some other people begged for foreign governments to interfere with Hong Kong's affairs and even to impose sanctions on Hong Kong. This kind of behavior has crossed the baseline of one country, threatening China's sovereignty and national security and challenging the authority of the central authorities and the Basic Law. Although these despicable acts died down earlier when the epidemic was severe, as the epidemic eases, rioters returned to the streets of Hong Kong 3 days ago on Sunday, causing road blockage, criminal damage, arson, beating, and chasing citizens, attacking the police, spilling harmful liquids, etc., resulting in at least 10 being injured. Those advocating Hong Kong independence flagrantly waved flags at the scene. This manifests the necessity and urgency for establishing and improving the legal system and enforcement mechanisms to safeguard national security, so as to effectively prevent, stop, and punish acts that threaten national security. As please complete your reply ASAP. Noted, Chairman. This is a very serious and solemn matter that needs to be clearly spelled out. Second, the decision will ensure one country, two systems will sail far and steady. One country is the prerequisite for a foundation of two systems. Establishing and improving at the national level the legal system and enforcement mechanisms for Hong Kong SAR to safeguard national security will help to safeguard national security as well as Hong Kong's development, long-term prosperity and stability. Only when the national security is safeguarded can one country, two systems be faithfully implemented, that we can leverage on the advantages of one country, two system to develop the economy and improve people's livelihood, and thereby better protecting the legitimate rights and freedoms of all people of Hong Kong. That the decision only targets acts of secession, sovereign state power, and organizing and carrying out terrorist activities that seriously threaten national security, as well as activities interfering with SAR's internal affairs by foreign or external forces. These things have been worrying the political and business sectors in Hong Kong, members of the public over the past year, prompting the public to have a deeper understanding of the importance of national security and hence the call for SAR government to respond proactively. The decision only targets the small minority of criminals jeopardizing national security, while the overwhelming majority of the public will be law-abiding, will be protected. Fourth, legislation for national security will endeavor to safeguard the lawful rights and interests of people in Hong Kong. The protection enjoyed by Hong Kong residents under Basic Law and other laws, including freedoms of speech, press, assembly, demonstrations, possessions, etc., will not be affected. The legislation will also not affect independent judicial power, including that of final adjudication exercised by the judiciary of Hong Kong. The decision does not amend the Basic Law, nor does it replace or exclude the provisions of BL 23. As stated in the decision, Hong Kong SAR should legislate as soon as possible to safeguard national security as required by the Basic Law of Hong Kong. Hong Kong SAR, therefore, still has the obligation to legislate as required under BL 23. Upon passage of the decision, Hong Kong SAR government will fully support the work of the Standing Committee of the NPC and to discharge its responsibility of safeguarding national security to ensure the long-term prosperity and stability of Hong Kong under one country, two systems. Thank you. Mr. Dennis Kwok. Secretary, I have a simple follow-up. In your reply, you said that on the 22nd of this month, the third session of the 13th NPC, the deliberation of NPC of the decision was announced. Was the SAR government ever informed before that decision? If so, when? President, as I said in my reply, on such matters, different parties may communicate with the SAR. We will not disclose the details concerned to the public. Thank you. Speaker is off mic. Secretary. Secretary, do you have anything to add? I've already answered the member's question. Thank you. Mr. Wong Kwok Kin. President, NPC has made a decision to safeguard national security. Mr. Wang Chen has really said that this will not replace our own legislation on BL23. And in the Secretary's reply, it is said that SAR still has the obligation, the constitutional obligation to legislate under Article BL23. The central authorities have trust in Hong Kong that we're going to enact on our own to legislate to safeguard national security, and it's been patient to wait for 23 years. Yet the legislation on Article 23 has yet to materialize. I'd like to ask the Secretary whether there is any plan and timetable on the part of the government to fill this gap in relation to BL23. The SL government keeps saying that it will do it as soon as possible in due course and create a favorable timing for the legislation to be enacted. When will be the opportune time to do that? What is your timetable? Does SL government have the plan to legislate under Article 23? Secretary, as I said, it's been close to 23 years since the reunification. The SL government has yet to fulfill its constitutional duty to legislate under BL23. This is undesirable and disappointing to us as well. In fact, it is the SAR's duty to legislate under BL23, not just the government's responsibility, because the SL has to enact this legislation on its own. Of course, the government has a part to play, but let's not forget that it is the overall responsibility of the SAR. As I said, many has smeared Article 23. They have demonized it. They do not refer to national security acts in other countries. When I read out the list of legislation overseas, I nearly needed to pause and take a sip of water because it's too long. Now, the problem is obvious now. Of course, the decision has clearly required SAR to discharge our responsibility. It has to be followed. What we have to say here that the reality of enacting domestic legislation is such that it is not easy. Some has blatantly asked to paralyze the government. Some has blatantly tried to paralyze the operation of the legislature because of the problem we face and because of the notable risk emerged. The country has decided on this decision to maintain the basic and fundamental interests of Hong Kong. Allow me to say this. If you look at the document, when the decision was promulgated, principles were listed out. And that is to substantially safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Hong Kong residents, regardless of the final law enacted. The rightful and legitimate interests of Hong Kong residents will not be undermined. You can see how much significance the country has attached to the rights and interests of Hong Kong residents. And it's already said that the target is the small minority of people who jeopardize national security. The overwhelming majority of members of the public who are law-abiding will be protected. Their lives and properties will be protected, and the fundamental rights and interests will be better protected. It's crystal clear in the law. About 20 members are still waiting to ask questions, so please, short answers and replies, please. Ms. Claudia Mo.
Official reply is simply pathetic. It talks about foreign countries, the UK, the US, Canada, and Australia, having national security laws as well. So the message is, what's the big deal about Hong Kong having one? What it fails to mention is that those foreign countries also have, on top of real separation of powers, they have this robust press and robust online journalism. Now, this minister sounds simply morally repugnant and politically dishonest. Now, I don't call him a liar. I call him politically dishonest. Is he actually employing double standards?
Secretary. President, the member who just spoke, well, I would not call her double standards. In fact, she has a multi-standard or has no standard whatsoever. There are so many similar acts overseas, and yet in Hong Kong, we're in this stage. Just yesterday, I read online that someone from the opposition camp asked, I think it was Mr. Leung, asked for legislature on our own on Article 23. Now, who sabotaged our intention to legislate under BL 23? Now, we know who they were, but now they are asking us to legislate quickly under BL 23. Well, we are going to do that. I said the member had double or multiple standards. She's forgotten that there was nothing in the Basic Law changed. Chapter 3 of the Basic Law, the obligations and rights of residents have all been preserved. Why didn't she mention those things? And I said that the basic principles are, regardless of the future legislation, such principles must be abided by. We must safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Hong Kong residents. Thank you. Mr. Lau Fok Kwok.
Reply to my question.
That was not your question. Please be seated. Mr. Lau Kwok Fan. Thank you. The administration has legislated under BL 23 for 3 years. However, we have more blatant activities of people who advocate Hong Kong independence and self-determination, and they also go to overseas asking for interference with Hong Kong matters affecting national security and interest, and therefore it is an urgent matter for the legal system and enforcement mechanisms to be established. Now, this is a legal system and enforcement mechanisms, whether it be the national security law or legislation under Article 23, Hong Kong police will be the major force to enforce this mechanism. With regard to the establishment and preparation, I'd like to know whether SL government and also the Security Bureau are well prepared to enforce the relevant legislation. Secretary, we have to understand the NPC is now deliberating a draft decision to authorize the NPCSC to enact a piece of legislation. So they are just deliberating on the draft decision. They have yet to reach the step to enact the legislation. So it will be premature to comment on the details of the law. However, one thing for sure is the SL government clearly has the duty to defend national security. Therefore, with regard to safeguarding national security, the government will at least work on the following fronts. First, to consider the resources necessary, the manpower and talents necessary, and the relevant training, and to consider how to cooperate and communicate and collaborate and interact with relevant organizations.
Government bills. This Council resumes the second reading debate on the National Anthem Bill. Ms. Tanya Chen, in accordance with Rule 16(2), I move that the motion be adjourned so that in relation to the draft decision by the NPCSC, we have a debate. Currently in Beijing, Mr. President, they are considering the making of a piece of legislation on national security for Hong Kong. We are worried there is fear. In fact, it is quite similar to what happened in the 1980s, when we we're aware of the talks on the future of Hong Kong. There is a confidence crisis. One country, two systems is suffering from a crisis. So I suggest that we adjourn so that we have a motion debate on the following. As the NPCSC is considering the NPC's draft decision on establishing and improving the legal system and enforcement mechanisms for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to safeguard national security, the decision in short, so that a Hong Kong version of the national security law may be in place, and it will target 4 categories of acts: acts of secession, subverting the state power, organizing and carrying out terrorist activities, as well as activities interfering with Hong Kong's internal affairs. There's duplicating Article 23. Would it be usurping our powers? And then we are concerned as to whether mainland agencies will come to Hong Kong to enforce the law. What are they about? Mr. President, I'm telling you about the scope of my motion. Ms. Tanya Chan, you can only be brief in telling us what you propose. I now suspend the meeting to consider the motion proposed by Ms. Tanya Chan.